I have recently finished The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings, and I thought I would share my opinions, my thoughts with you guys. Now, Witcher 1 was a classic, a flawed classic with many things to complain about, but a classic nonetheless. And so The Witcher 2 not only has to stand as its own game and be judged, it also has to be judged as a successor to such a classic. And of course the big question is, how did it do on both of those fronts? Now I can tell you straight away that this game is a massive step forward technically. It really is. It looks really nice. It looks so much better than the first game, but it actually looks pretty good for games of that particular year, 2011. With my only complaint being I would have liked to have seen slightly more and better options with regards anti-aliasing. It seems to use a post-processing form of anti-aliasing and it's not the best. There is an option called ubersampling which will make your game look a lot better. However, it is performance intensive. It will drop your frame rate, so you're going to need an exceptionally strong rig. But overall, nothing to complain about. And the same is true of the audio. The ambient sound is fine, very appropriate to the locales you're in. And of course the soundtrack. The soundtrack is excellent. All of the Witcher games have great soundtracks. This is no exception. And of course that really does help add to the atmosphere, to the feeling of playing an epic game. The world itself is similar to the Witcher 1 world in some ways. You have different areas available to you at different points in the story, and those areas tend to be self-contained zones. The zones seem to be a little smaller than they did in the first game, and they're not as open. I mean, in the first one, you generally could wander around. If you were in the swamp, for example, in Witcher 1, you could wander around in all directions, whereas in The Witcher 2, you do feel a little more funneled. There are lots of corridors, so even in a forest, there are hilly areas that you cannot climb. You can't just pick a direction and, run off in that direction. You are going through these winding paths through different valleys and so on. So you will feel a little more restricted in the way you can move. There are a few nice additions. So, for example, you can now climb up on ledges, you can climb ladders, you can drop off ledges, which gives you more of a feeling of freedom, but overall, you're actually a little bit more limited. However, the world itself is very well designed. It seems very appropriate for whatever area you're in, and it lends itself very well to the story being told. The people that you will find within that world have also seen a massive improvement from the first game. They actually look pretty good. There seems to be more variety, they seem to look, a lot more realistic, and the voice acting is far superior. I didn't find any instances of NPCs whose voices were oddly mismatching their bodies or changing midway through conversations. They had very good dialogue. The dialogue flowed very well. There were no uncomfortable moments where it felt you'd been totally derailed. Everything worked really well, and once again helped progress the story of whatever quest you were on. For those of you who did not play the first Witcher game, you might be wondering why I'm making a big point of that, but it was a weakness in the first game, so things have been massively improved for this one. But then that is a recurring theme for this particular game. A lot of improvements over the first game. The first game, as I've said before and will keep saying, a classic, a truly great game that suffered an awful lot of flaws. This game has polished a lot of those flaws or removed them and really does shine. Another example of an improvement would be the combat system. Now, the combat system in Witcher 2 is far more fluid and you seem to have more influence over it. It's actually a lot more difficult than in the first game. The first game was essentially click on the enemy at the right moment and you would do the damage. You would occasionally press the right sign, but on the whole, combat was very simple. In The Witcher 2, you have to time your attacks very well. You have to make sure you're using the correct attack, the strong or the fast attack. You don't automatically get a group style, and so multiple opponents can be a real problem, especially if they flank you. You have to learn to parry. You have to learn to roll out of the way. Now that's something that some people won't like. Purists will not like the fact that Geralt is rolling. They would have preferred him to spin and pirouette and move like a dancer as he is supposed to. In Witcher 2, you roll. There is actually a mod that will fix that for you. However, that is out of scope for this particular discussion. But you need to learn how to roll. You need to learn how to get out of the way, avoid being flanked, and flank your opponent. Use of signs seems to be better thought out, although I have to tell you, I had problems with it. I had a kind of odd delay, a sluggishness when trying to activate signs. So sometimes I would take 2 or 3 taps before the sign would activate, or it would seem to activate a second or so late. I had all sorts of problems. Now, I do know several other people reported the same sort of problems. I went through quite a few forums. However, many other people did not. Many other people got very, very responsive signs. And so I'm not totally sure whether that's a problem with my setup or the game itself. However, you should probably be aware of that. Overall, the combat is very, very responsive, but there are the occasional things like that that you might get a little irritated. One other thing, you sometimes find yourself attacking and then suddenly wanting to dodge because you see something else attack, and you'll find you're unable to do it. The game won't let you dodge out of the way until you've finished whatever sequence of attacks you've done. That does feel a little unresponsive, especially if you compare it to The Witcher 3, which I've played, and you do get a far more responsive feeling when playing The Witcher 3. However, Witcher 2 in general is a massive step forward in combat over the first game. You definitely feel like you need to use more skill, to use more preparation, to do the fighting, and it is a lot more rewarding and a little less frustrating. One area of the second game where I'm not totally convinced they managed to improve over the first is Alchemy. Now, in the first game, Alchemy was very important. If you were doing a hard playthrough, if you were using the hard difficulty, you probably needed to use potions fairly regularly. And, making the potions was, well, I wouldn't say it was a major task, but it did involve an awful lot of running around, picking flowers from bushes, stealing alcohol from barrels and that type of thing, and then meditating and creating those potions. And that did feel a little grindy on occasion. In the second game, they seem to have tried to streamline the process, which I'm actually a fan of. I don't mind streamlining. But I think they missed the mark. For some reason, it still feels like a grind. You don't need alcohol anymore, but you still need lots of different components. You need to swap them in and out. And honestly, the process feels just as time-consuming. There doesn't seem to be any major change. The problem is that you now need to meditate to drink potions. You can't just swig a potion at any point. You need to meditate. This in itself might not be a problem, except for the fact that potions only last for about 10 minutes now. In the first game, they would last for several hours, 8 hours. In this, they'll last for 10 minutes. And so, if you want to keep the potions active all the time, you need to meditate every 10 minutes. And whilst you could say, well, only take the potions when you think you're going to need them, the game doesn't let you know when you're going to need them. And I learnt very early on that you pretty much had to keep the potions up just in case, because a fight could break out at any time. This is made even worse by the fact that you can't just top your potions up. Say you've got 2 minutes left on all your potions. You can't meditate and take new potions so you've got 10 minutes left. You kind of have to wait until all of the potions have run out so your toxicity's reset. So you will find occasionally you might want to wait for 2 minutes, stood completely stock still before travelling to a new area where you might get into a fight. There are plenty of times where you'll go from one place to the next and get a cutscene that will last for, it could even last in-game several hours. And you'll come out of the cutscene in a major battle with no potions. And if you have built your character very much around the alchemy tree, that can be devastating. Now, I know what they were going for. They were going for the feeling that you needed to prepare for what was to come. You needed to pick your potions and prepare for the fight, for the monster. Unfortunately, it just didn't seem to work. I was constantly panicking and making sure I had potions in my system because I had an alchemy build that required me really to be effective to have potions in my system. I was constantly taking potions just in case. I'm going to a bar now, but I'm taking potions because you never know what might happen and I need them. And it just, I think it missed the mark when it came to streamlining. Of course, this problem was more pronounced for me because I did go down the alchemy tree. That was the build I chose. There are alternative builds. You can go heavily down the swordsman tree, or you can focus on the signs. Now, with the problems I was having with the signs, that was never going to be something I tried, but they do look interesting, both of those trees. So there does seem to be some room for multiple playthroughs just based upon the type of Witcher you want to play. And this is even more relevant seeing as there seem to be multiple paths in this game. I haven't touched the story yet, but I can tell you at some point early on the story branches, and I've only played one side of it, but I am reliably told the other side of the story is completely different. So in actual fact, at this point, my review's based upon what is only half the game. I need to go back and play the game once more and choose the other path and try that. And of course, on the subject of the story, let's face it, that's what the Witcher games come down to. The story. Has it got that epic tale that Witcher 1 had? Does it have that feeling of being in a living, breathing, epic adventure? And the answer is yes, a resounding yes. This story is great. It is, just like The Witcher, it is not a story of good versus evil. It is not even a story of people versus monsters, because like in the first game, it is impossible to distinguish people from monsters on occasion. In fact, you're fairly convinced some of the biggest monsters in the game are people. And some people who exhibit traits that we would associate as evil also show great good. And likewise, people who on the surface seem to be good show, well, shall we say horrible judgment on certain moral issues. There's no black and white. As much as you can try to do the right thing all the time, you will feel like you've not managed it. You're going to be questioning whether or not you made the right decision. And some people are going to tell you one path is less evil or more good than the other, but you'll find equal numbers of people saying the opposite. The Witcher 2 story, very similar to Witcher 1, is one of those stories that will leave a lot of people divided, arguing with each other over who was the more right, who was good and who was evil. And again, I would actually say both sides are right, both sides are wrong, and that's why the Witcher games are so good. You really have a hard time knowing whether you're the good guy or the bad guy. All the way through the game, you're being pulled around by the whims of kings, sorcerers, and, random leaders of different factions. You're being tasked to do things to help other people, and sometimes your own mission, your own goals, your own needs become secondary. You might want to focus on something that's important to you, but you won't be given that choice until you have done what is required of you by some king or other. And it can be frustrating, but not in a bad way. frustrating in the way that shows you're involved in the game, that shows you're being emotionally drawn in. Now, I won't be covering any spoilers in this video, but I will tell you I felt the ending was not as epic and dramatic as the ending in Witcher 1, which I think was one of the best endings to a game I've ever played, to be honest, so it was going to be a tough feat to beat that one. But what I felt from the Witcher 2 ending was it was setting up the next game. It seemed to be setting the stage. Well, no, it was definitely setting the stage for Witcher 3. So whilst this was a great tale, a great story in of itself, you really are going to have to continue on and play The Witcher 3 to find out how things go. But let's be honest, if you're going to play through Witcher 2, you're definitely going to play through Witcher 3. And if you want my opinion as to whether you should do that, the answer is hell yes. I mean, I highly recommend people play Witcher 1, but I do understand that game has it's not the easiest game to play, and I don't mean it requires a lot of skill. It's just got a lot of frustrating parts. There are many flaws, and you do have to overlook a lot of problems, a lot of little issues. But you know, if you can do that, you should play Witcher 1. However, if you're not the sort of person who wants to go through that pain barrier just to get one of the greatest stories told in a game, I understand. But you should play The Witcher 2 then. The Witcher 2 is a far more polished game. It's another great story, but this time it's told very, very well. And I think it will give you a lot of background, a lot of lore and knowledge, and a connection to the characters that are going to appear in the third game. And of course, unless you've been living under a rock for the last few months, you probably know people are generally recommending Witcher 3 as a game to play. So yes, my recommendation for The Witcher 2 is an absolutely superb game. Almost as good as The Witcher 1 from the point of view of the story, and easily it's better when it comes to execution. A very well executed game. I highly recommend getting this game, and I actually recommend playing through it at least twice. I haven't done that yet, but I definitely intend to. Once I have finished The Witcher 3 on what is going to be a continuation of this playthrough, I am probably going to go back and do the whole thing again, this time choosing a totally different path. And who knows, perhaps I will do another video discussing the game once I've done that. However, for now, that is all. I hope these rambling thoughts of mine were useful and not too boring, and of course, I look forward to seeing you when I do the same sort of thing for The Witcher 3.